Hello and welcome to the technical overview version of the introduction to the new features that we're providing in Layout Developer 12.1. I'm Simon Taylor, I'm the product manager for Layout Developer, and I'll be taking you through all the new features which we're providing in this release. So this is the agenda for this session. We're going to look at first the Layout Editor product which we're releasing. Then we're going to look at some of the extra features which are provided in support of Layout Editor, such as JavaScript toolbars, insert markup, and some of the yellow bar tools. Then we're going to look at the debugger updates we're providing, and then a couple of minor features later on, like the Pseudo-font updates and the work we've done on the MathJax library. So let's start with the new product we're introducing in this release to work alongside Layout Developer, and that's Layout Editor. So Layout Editor is a new version of Layout Developer, and it's aimed right at those users who use the product and the user interface to create or to finish documents by hand. So they might be editing a little bit of text, they might want to put in new graphics inside frames, they might want to tweak the formatting of a paragraph, that kind of thing, to squeeze it back. So all these manual tasks don't need the development environment. So in Layout Editor, all of the development stuff, all the template code, is hidden away from the user so that they can't change it, can't change the integrity of the template to make it look different from what the template developer intended. To help them do that, we've provided a set of tools in this release and the previous release to allow template developers to create custom interfaces to make Layout Editor users a lot more efficient and achieve their tasks without having to resort to editing template code. To ensure Layout Editor files can't be edited by anybody and everybody, we have a new set of file types. Layout Developer can create all of these file types, but Layout Editor can only open, work with, and save Layout Editor files. So there are new macros inside Layout Developer, tsavele, and the method ftemplate.savele, and those allow you to create Layout Editor documents, which are 3LE files, and Layout Editor templates, which are 3LF files. There's also a macro tnsavele, which allows you to save a namespace in Layout Developer out as a Layout Editor namespace. So those namespaces can then be linked to your Layout Editor templates. So as it says there, the extensions are 3LF for templates, 3LE for documents, and 3LN for namespace files. As with templates and documents, library files also need to be protected. We recommend that libraries are used to make customizations to the application when you're delivering solutions based on Layout Editor. So if you're going to make changes to menus and toolbars and that kind of thing, make those customizations and make them available in a Layout Editor library. For this reason, there's a new method a new macro to create a Layout Editor version of a library. So with these methods, you point the tool at the library that you want to encrypt, and it will save out a new version of the library in the target location that you've specified. If you overwrite a library, then a .back version of the old library will be created, so you haven't lost what you had originally. You can always roll back to that if you want to. One thing I would stress though is don't overwrite your existing library folders. That is not really going to be very helpful at all. To help users work within Layout Editor, we've provided two new toolbars. These two toolbars are part of the main toolbar, which is active in Layout Editor. These different toolbars are active depending on which working mode you're in. So there's a text mode toolbar and a page mode toolbar. The text mode toolbar uses insert markup definitions, and you'll learn a bit about those a bit more later on in this presentation. The page mode toolbar just uses some standard macros which are available anywhere inside Layout Developer and Layout Editor. The text mode one covers sort of basic tasks which you're going to do when you are working with text. So you can make things bold or italic, you can change the text height and width, you can change the text color. You can also insert underlines and strike-throughs, and you can also insert markup for some specific object types like tables and graphics, equations and links. These can be customized at both the application level and the template level. So when we talk about insert markup definitions later on, you can understand how you can customize those to fit the markup which is being used within your document. The page mode toolbar allows you to create a new frame and import new content, but it also lets you manage the frames which are on the layers. So if you have a frame selected, you can bring it forward or send it backwards using the icons which we provided. As layout editor users don't have access to any template development features, we've had to make some changes to the dialog boxes as well. So the document configuration, document preferences has a reduced set of preferences. So we only show those which are really applicable to a layout editor user. If you are going to work with control streams, the option to create new control streams has been removed. So there's no longer in the drop down a new option. You can only select control streams which have been created and provided by the template developer. The text and paragraph property dialogues have also changed. They now insert a new processing instruction, the X3B2 layout processing instruction, and the paragraph properties dialog does no longer insert a lump. It inserts the individual processing instructions for the features and properties which you have set within the paragraph properties dialog. So those are the main interface changes. There are others, but these are the major ones. As with dialog boxes, there are a certain number of other things which you can't do inside Layout Editor that you can do inside Layout Developer. So one of the big things is that processing instructions work differently when they're in the main content stream. So only X3B2 prefix processing instructions will be executed in the main content stream. So if you put in a show string or you put in something else, you might already know those instructions. Those will be ignored in Layout Editor. They'll work in Layout Developer, but they will not work in Layout Editor. They must be prefixed with the X3B2 namespace prefix. Users can only create and edit certain tag types. So as far as text content is concerned, they can only create text streams, XML streams, and XML DOMs. They can only also create raster graphics and object graphics. Any other tag type is restricted. So you won't see those in drop-down lists of tags, and you won't be able to edit them. If you do try to open one of those tags or do anything with those tags like copying, renaming, deleting, that kind of thing, it'll just be ignored by Layout Editor. A number of macros are also disabled, and part of the documentation provides a table which lists which ones are available and which ones aren't. Most of them, pretty much all of them, are allowable from scripts or from the user interface, but they are not available to be run from the macro bar. We've also restricted the number of command line options which can be executed when starting up Layout Editor. You can use command line options to do all kinds of weird and wonderful things, and we wanted to make sure that people weren't going to do those weird and wonderful things, so most of them are disallowed. If you do want to customize things using the command line options, then use an add-on library to set these command line options. When you're developing Layout Editor templates, you might want to see in Layout Developer things which are restricted. And there's an ALE warnings command line parameter when you're starting up Layout Developer, which you can use to raise errors when you do stuff which is not allowed inside Layout Editor. So if you set the command line option, then if you run a macro or try to edit a tag or do something with the page which is not allowed, then an error will be raised, and you can send those through to the debugger if you want to. At the end of the documentation for this release, there's an appendix, and that appendix has a number of tables which lists the information about what is and what isn't allowed inside Layout Editor. So I recommend when you're developing templates for Layout Editor, you have a look at that stuff and make sure you're not going to do something which is going to fail inside Layout Editor. Because of these restrictions, we very strongly suggest that if you have a problem with your template, you run it in Layout Developer with ALE warnings turned on. That way you will find out whether you're doing something incorrect inside Layout Editor. Always do that before raising a support case. Support will bounce it back pretty quickly if they find that you're doing something which is not allowed inside Layout Editor and you haven't caught in your template development. Moving on to one of the new features which is provided in 12.1 in support of Layout Editor, and that's JavaScript Toolbars. This feature provides a JavaScript interface via the formatting object model to the toolbars which are available in Layout Developer and Layout Editor. So with this feature you can create and define your own actions which exist on the toolbar. So you can specify the icon, the grey test and all that kind of thing. You can create and define and edit toolbars, whether they're existing toolbars or new ones which you've created. And you can decide which toolbars are being displayed, which ones aren't being displayed. You can tie those toolbars then to different template events. So if somebody changes mode, for example, you can show a different set of toolbars. Or if they are on a particular page with certain types of content in, and you can capture that, maybe via the display stuff in the formatting object model, then you can show a different set of toolbars based on those events. So there are two main types of objects that are provided with this feature. The first one is the fToolbar object. You can access the fToolbar objects via application. Application tells you which toolbars you have available, but it also lists the active toolbars, so the ones which are on display in the interface at that time. Toolbars are collections of items, and there's a number of different items which we provide in this release. We will be providing a couple more later on. So actions specify the things which you actually click on in the toolbar and do something, but you can also have text, space, and fillers which expand to stretch the amount of space between groups of icons. So as I just said, toolbar actions are the clickable things within a toolbar. So they have an icon associated with them and an action that needs to be executed when that icon is clicked. There's also a number of other properties which affect whether that icon is displayable, or whether it's grayed out, or whether it should be viewed as selected, that kind of thing. So the fToolbar action is the main object which you work with. There are tools to get it and to create it, as you can see up there in the code section. As with all other objects inside Layout Developer, it's always a good idea to test whether it exists before creating it. So that's the pattern, the standard pattern that I follow when I'm creating code, which edits these things. So the toolbar action.action property is the code that you want to execute when that icon is clicked. So this is a string. You can use macros in there, which is like the default old-fashioned way of doing things. But if you put the value within braces, then you can execute JavaScript from the toolbar action. I think this is a new feature in 12.1. The icon property is the name of the icon to use. We don't yet have a way of defining those via JavaScript in Layout Developer, but you can create those and run a version of sicon user pretty easily. And as we introduced in 12.0, you can use PNGs for the icons rather than using the old bitmap things which you drew in the interface in the toolbar preferences dialog box world. There's a description option property, which is the information which is shown in the status bar. Again, that's a string. There's text. So as you know, with APP's layout developers toolbars, you can either show the icons or the text or both. So if you're only showing text or text and icons, this text property is the text version of the action. I don't know anybody who still uses that, but it's still there and available for you if you want to. There's the grey test string. So if you want to make the action unavailable under certain conditions, then you would put in an expression inside this value as the string, which tells layout developer to grey out the icon. And there's this selected test string. So if you want to test whether something's been clicked and you have a way of evaluating that with an expression, then you would use the selected text string property to set that expression. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there are 3 other types of toolbar item. Toolbar text allows you to provide like a label for a set of icons or an individual icon, and this will appear as text in the toolbar. So you can create a new toolbar text object and then set its text property to the text that you want to appear. There's a fill, and this defines like stretchy space, which will expand to fill the amount of space available in the toolbar. So you would create a new toolbar fill object and use that as an item to put into your toolbar. And then there's toolbar space, which defines a fixed amount of space within the toolbar. So if you wanted to separate your icons by 3 spaces, then you would create an toolbar space object with a width value of 3 and use that. So this covers the toolbar items which are available at the moment. In future releases, we'll be providing groups and other types of toolbar items, but hopefully we'll be able to provide that in 12.2. Moving on to toolbars themselves then, there are methods on the application object to get and create toolbars, and as you can see from this little code chunk here, this follows the standard pattern of testing to see whether the thing exists before creating a new one. When you create a new toolbar, they become active, so they're visible. For that reason, you need to set its location and its display properties. So you want to be able to say that the toolbar is going to appear at the top, bottom, left or right of the interface, and whether to use icons, text or both. So those 2 properties need to be set when you create a new toolbar. The toolbar object that you get then has a number of methods on it to manage the items which are actually on the toolbar. So there's the clear method, and that removes all items from the toolbar. So if you're going to create or get one and create it from scratch, then you need to clear everything from it. Then there's add item method, which takes an item that you've created, like in the previous slide, and adds that to the toolbar. And there's also a method to remove a specified item from the toolbar itself. So using these methods, you can create new toolbars and then add the actions to them, manage those items, and create the toolbar that you're looking for. As in the Toolbar Preferences dialog box, there's a number of other properties that you can set on toolbars. So there's the wrap option, and that specifies whether the toolbar items can wrap if the toolbar isn't wide enough to show all of the items. You can specify the default gap between the items on the toolbar. You can specify a margin on the toolbar, and this is slightly different, and this isn't available through the interface, but you can specify a default action for the items on the toolbar. So you can apply a bit of code to all of the icons, which will happen by default if the items on the toolbar don't have their own action. Sounds a bit complicated, but it's really to set up a bit of default code to execute when an item is clicked on the toolbar which doesn't have its own action value. As we've already seen, the application object has methods to create and get toolbars, but also you can see a list of the toolbars which layout developer or layout editor is aware of, and that's available through application.toolbars. There's also methods to manage the active toolbars. So fapplication.active toolbars returns you a list of the toolbars which are currently being shown in the interface. You can clear all the active toolbars, so you can reset to no toolbars using this method, and then you can add new active toolbars. So if you wanted to completely refresh the interface with a new set of toolbars, then you can add a number of different toolbars once you've cleared it. You can also remove a specific active toolbar from the list of those which are being shown. When you're doing this stuff with the active toolbars, you can understandably see that the interface is going to flicker a little bit as it redraws with each new toolbar which is being added. For that reason, we have a method to suspend the toolbar refresh. So you can pause the toolbar redrawing until you've made all your changes, and then you can turn it back on again using the suspend toolbar refresh method. There's also a way to force a new redrawing of the toolbars which are on display. So fapplication.toolbar refresh will refresh and redraw the toolbars which are active at that time. This pretty much covers everything in the JavaScript toolbar interface. As I said, this is here to provide a means for creating custom interfaces, whether in Layout Developer or in Layout Editor. So hopefully you'll use this to create some great new interfaces which make your users a lot more productive. To allow users to create small little functions which can sit on toolbars and do really sort of trivial things like inserting bold or italic, that kind of thing, we've added a new feature in this release called Insert Markup, and this section will cover what's going on with that feature. So Insert Markup allows you to define a little action which will insert a string where the cursor is, and it's up to you to define what string goes into it, but also because Insert Markup pops up a little dialog box, you can get the user to input different types of information to populate that string. So some of them can be really simple, things like numbers or strings, or a boolean, for example, but you can also have file pickers, tag pickers, that kind of thing, or you can predefine a list of selectable options which go in there. The definitions that you create are called by a macro or a FOM method. Talk about that in a little while. But the definitions actually define the dialog box which pops up, the title of it, the markup which appears at the beginning and the end if you've selected some text, for example. It defines the list of output value types that you can specify, and you can have a verification procedure to make sure that the entries that the users put in is valid. And you can also associate a function with the definition so that when OK is clicked on the dialog box, you can do something with that value, wrap it up in some more markup, and then insert that extra markup into the content. You can attach these definitions at both the application level and the template level. So we'll talk about that in a little while, but you can have basically two tiers of insert markup definitions which are active. One specific to all the things which are being run on the application, and then one which is specific to the template which is being used. You can use these actions then in your custom toolbars. So if you've used, as you've seen in the previous section on JavaScript toolbars, if you've created an action on a toolbar which is to insert text width, you can associate your insert markup definition with that toolbar item to make it easier and quicker to develop these kind of things. So there are a number of different objects in the formatting object model to help you manage your definitions, your insert markup definitions. As I mentioned earlier, the definitions can be declared at the application level and at the template level. Template level definitions will overwrite those ones which are declared at the application level. So you can have definitions with the same name at both levels, but the template one will override the one at the application level. At the application level, the property insert markup defaults, fapplication.insert markup defaults, is a list of the insert markup items that you've declared. At the template level, it's template.insert markup definitions, and again, that's another list of the insert markup items. The f-insert markup item is the object which holds all the definitions and the properties for that definition that you're creating. It has a constructor, so you would just create it by using new f-insert markup item. You can add those definitions to the lists, so you can either add it to the list by name, as you can see in that first line of code there, or you can insert it as an object. So the name which you give it, so as you can see, it's template.insert markup definitions.bold. The name that you give it is the name that you will use to call that definition when you want to use it. So let's start looking at the properties of the f-insert markup object. So the first one is the type. The type declares what kind of information you're expecting from the user. Okay, so this kind of provides some validation in the dialog box which gets created. So if somebody, for example, is expecting a Boolean and somebody types in monkey, for example, then that would not be a valid type of input into the dialog box. So the types are listed here. None specifies that you don't want to see a little pop-up dialog box. Tag, the tag type provides a tag picker, so you can pick any of the tags which are in the document. There's a color picker, a font picker. There's a length validator, so the value that gets input must be a valid length. There's a string type. There's a path one, which allows you to pick a file. Boolean I've mentioned, which is either on or off. There's a number type, which validates the field to be a number. There's a valid name type, and there's a list. And the list is kind of interesting because it allows you to specify a number of values which the user can pick from. Okay, so you've defined the type of input that you're expecting from your user. The next step is to handle that kind of information and to set up the dialog box. So the f-insert markup item, markup start and markup end properties allow you to define as a string the information which gets inserted at the cursor position. So markup start will be before the cursor, markup end will be after the cursor. So again, if you selected some text, markup start will appear before the selected text, markup end will appear at the end of the selected text. When using insert markup, the little dialog boxes which pop up are auto-generated based on the definition. So you can set some properties of that dialog box. The first one is the title of the dialog box, so the string which appears up in the top bar at the top. You can then specify values which are allowed to be selected for certain types of definition. So if you've got a length type definition, for example, or you've got a list type, then the values property allows you to list the values which the user can select. So you can provide like default values there. The default property lets you set the default selected value. So as you can see in this little pop-up box, the 12 points which is already in the dialog box field is provided by the default value. So you can pre-select a value for your user if you want to make life a bit easier for them. The value which the user inserts can be used in markup start and markup end using $1. So whatever they've selected in their dialog box, you can insert within your markup. As you can see in the little bit of code here, you can insert in the markup as a value. It's like treating it as a variable. You can further validate the values which get inserted by the user by using dialog box validation codes. So the f-insert markup item verify property lets you specify one of those dialog box validation codes. And if you want more information about that, have a look in the dialog box documentation, and you can see there's a big long list of validation codes which you can use to further validate the value which the user has inserted into their dialog box. The last property to talk about is the function property. Now this function property allows you to declare some code which will get used by between the user hitting OK and the strings being inserted into the content. So you can take the value which has been selected, and that's passed to the function as argument 0, and the insert markup definition, and then you can massage what the user has input and change the markup start and markup end, which will get output to suit whatever the user's input. So the example which is shown here is inserting a table based on the number of rows, number of columns rather, which the user has selected in the drop-down dialog box. So as you can see over here in the definition, over on the right-hand side, the user can select whether they want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 columns. The code will take that value and then create like a dummy table which has the correct number of entries, and apply those entries to the markup start and markup end definitions for that insert markup definition, so that when the APP or ALD gets to insert that string, it's got an updated version based on the result of that function. So you can use these functions to do all kinds of things. The example here is just massaging the insert, the markup start and the markup end to create a table. But you can go off and validate that a file exists, for example, or you can go and check whether the thing which the user is inserting is valid in the XML structure. All kinds of things that you can use that function for. So you've created your definitions and you've associated them either with the template list or the application list. Now you want to actually use the things. So how do you do that? Well, there's both a macro and a number of FOM methods to be able to use those things. Both of them will take the name of the definition that you've used, and you can also provide an optional value. So from a macro point of view, there's a t-insert markup macro. If you follow that by the name of the definition that you've applied, then it will insert that. So you can do, as you can see here, t-insert markup bold, and it will use the definition that's named bold, whether that's at the template level or the application level, whichever one takes priority. You can also provide a value with a t-insert markup macro. So you can call it by name and then give it a value, and it will automatically populate the dialog box with that value and just not show the dialog box, and it will insert the definition with the value that you've selected. If you don't provide a value and the definition type is expecting a dialog box, then the dialog box will pop up and you better allow your users to select a value. They can hit OK and it will insert that code for you. Both the fstream object and the fdEditStream objects have these insert methods. So fdEditStream is a new object type provided for 12.1, and that represents the stream that's in the yellow bar at that point. So you can insert it in the stream which is active in the yellow bar, or you can select a stream, go to a position in that stream, and then use your insert markup definition. So fstream has insert markup and fdstream has insert markup as methods. Again, as with the macros, they both take 1 or 2 arguments. You can give it the name of the definition to use, or you can include the value to use with that definition if that's the way the definition's set up. So that covers the insert markup application. As I said earlier, it's really a tool for quickly and easily creating little pop-up dialog box and actions to insert strings into your content. What we found was that a lot of people were creating these things by hand and creating a load of dialog boxes in the background. This hopefully will make it a lot more simple to do that, because you don't have to learn any dialog box code. You just have to create the definition and use it by hand. Also, having it as a definition that's associated with either the template or the application, you can use those dynamically. So you can change the definition depending on where the user is in the text, for example. Okay, so if they are in a different XML position, you can rewrite the definition, the insert. So you've got a definition which inserts an element. You can insert the allowed list of selectable tags based on where they are in the XML hierarchy, that kind of thing. So the next section of features in 12.1 are additions that we've made to the yellow bar and how we work with the yellow bar. As an overview, we've provided a few tools to help you edit the content that's in the yellow bar. And we've also exposed a number of the text properties in the JavaScript FOM for what's going on in the yellow bar, the text which is appearing there. So the first tool we're going to talk about is the idea of being able to pretty print the XML which is in the yellow bar. So a lot of times you'll get XML from whatever source and it'll appear in the yellow bar and it'll all be a single long continuous line. That's all very well, but you can't read it very well. It's very difficult sometimes to spot the hierarchies which are in the XML. So there's a new macro and a new FOM method to allow you to pretty print that XML. So it will indent the XML hierarchies to help you read it a lot easier. That indenting kind of goes hand in hand with the third one listed here, which is auto indent. So you can turn on auto indent for a stream, and what layout developer and layout editor will do automatically is when you hit return, it will indent the next line to the same level of indent that the previous line has got. This will stop you having to hit space about 20 different times every time that you start a new line when you're sort of heavily nested within some XML. But this also applies to JavaScript as well. So if you're editing JavaScript in the yellow bar, the auto indent feature will automatically indent if you're within a function or sort of nested blocks of code. If you've used pretty print on your XML, you might want to normalize the white space back down to a single line, and there's a macro and FOM method to do that. The txml normalize space or fstream.xml normalize space method will strip out all the space that's not useful, as it were. There's an optional argument to provide a strip space control stream. So if you've got one set up to handle the white space on your XML stream, you can use that strip space control stream to specify whether the white space which is in the XML is useful or not useful. And using that with the normalized space methods and macros will allow you to apply that to the content which gets manipulated. I think I mentioned earlier that there's a new object called the FD edit stream as part of the display objects. This object provides information about the content stream which is open in the yellow bar when you're in text mode. So the FD edit stream object provides a number of properties about that stream and about where the cursor is. So the main one is the source. So this provides a link back to the fstream object which is being represented. There's the position property. This is the equivalent to getVar21522, which gives you the character position of the cursor within the stream in the yellow bar. If you've got characters selected, the fdEditStream.numChars property will give you the number of characters which are selected, and that's the equivalent to getVar21523. The selected chars is kind of similar, but that will return you the actual characters which have been selected in the yellow bar. Again, that's equivalent to getVar11524. The start and end position of the view of the stream in the yellow bar is provided by fdEditStream view start position and view end position. So those are two getVars, 21528 and 21529. So you can actually see which characters the character range the user can see in the yellow bar. There's a couple of there's also XML node. So if you're using XML and layout developer or layout editor is aware of the DOM structure for that node at that point, the fdEditStream XML node will return you an fx node object for that node in the content stream. So this is really useful if you want to do some validation at that point, or maybe you're using an insert markup dialog box to provide a list of the allowed elements that a user could insert, for example, or you want to do something based on the XML node at that point, make a decision in your code, for example, then the FD edit stream XML node will be a useful property to be able to use it there. There's a couple of methods on the FD edit stream. There's the set cursor position, which will take the cursor and move it to a particular point. You can provide 2 arguments for that if you want to select a character range as well. And as I mentioned in the insert markup section of this presentation, there's the FD edit stream insert markup method, which allows you to call the insert markup definition. The next section I want to talk about are the updates that we've made to the debugger in the 12.1 release. There are 2 main areas that we concentrated on in 12.1 for the debugger. The first area is updating the resources panel. So the resources panel is the list on the left hand side which shows you all the tags. This has been tidied up a bit. We've sorted out the way that the tags are sorted, so they're sorted alphabetically better now. We've enabled drag and drop within that resources panel, and we've added a context menu. The context menu kind of replaces some of the icons which were in there and the things that you could do just to tidy things up. We've also added some security features to the debugger. So as you know, the debugger connects to Layout Developer via a socket connection, and we wanted to make that connection more secure to help the users provide their debugger in a secure environment. So here we have the debugger open with a version of the demo file. First thing you'll notice is that the tags now are sorted in alphabetical order. Beforehand, lowercase tags were sorted separately from uppercase tags, and I don't know about you, but I found that a bit annoying. Namespaces are stored at the bottom of the list, so they're easier to find. You won't get them sort of cluttering up the main list, so it should be easier to find things. If I switch to by type, you can see that the tree is a lot easier. It's now a little pop-up tree rather than the big sections which we had before. The resource panel now features drag and drop. If you're in by name mode, you can drag a tag from where it is to a different namespace, and that will move the tag to that namespace. Okay, you can drag it back if you want to undo that. If you're in type mode, you can change the type of a tag by just dragging it into a different tag type, and it will add it to that list. So changing the tag type in by type and changing the namespace in name mode. Also in the resource panel now is a context menu, so you can right click anywhere, you get an option to create a new tag, and you can refresh the list. If you're on a tag and right click, then you have the option to open it. Again, you can create a new one. There's a new tag info dialog box, I'll show you that in a sec. You can rename and change type. You can delete the tag and again refresh the list. So let's have a look at the tag info first. This generates a little pop-up which gives you information that you would see in the T-Browse dialog box in Layout Developer. Gives you information about the tag. You can rename it, and that makes the renaming field active inside the resource tree. And if you change type, it makes the type indicator icon active, and you can select the tag type to change the tag's type to whatever you want to. If you create a new tag, you get a little dialog box which pops up, which asks you to specify the type of the tag that you want to create, and you can give it a name. So let's create a script called Simon. Hit OK, and that will add the script tag to your resource tree. To allow you to configure how your socket allows connections to your layout developer, there's a new security.3ad file which is in the install folder. And that takes a number of different keywords to help you configure the connection behavior to layout developer. The first one is this debugger remote keyword. So this allows you to specify whether other people on your network can connect to your version of Layout Developer or not. So if the debugger remote value is true, then other people on your network can connect to your version of Layout Developer via the socket. If it's false, then only the local user can connect to your version of Layout Developer. If you are allowing it to other users to connect on your network, then you might also want to only allow specific users to connect to it, and that's where the debugger fixed URI keyword comes in. If this value is true, a token value of 0 will be used. If it's false, then the socket connection will require the URI to use the randomly generated token value. That randomly generated token value can be found on the fdebugsocket.token property, and if you try to connect to Layout Developer without that and the value is false, then you'll get a little pop-up dialog box which is asking you to input the token value before you can connect to your Layout Developer. Okay, so you can, as I said, you can allow different people to connect or not to connect. You can allow anybody to connect via having the fixed URI value set to true, or you can only allow specific users to connect by asking them for the randomly generated token value, which you can provide them either by using an alert or copying it down from your version of the debugger which is connected via the socket. By default, the communication between the browser and the socket connection in Layout Developer is unencrypted, but you can encrypt it using a security certificate and a private key. The debugger certificate chain keyword that you can set up in your security.3ad file will point to the certificate file, and the debugger private key keyword can point to the key file location. It's up to you or your organization to generate those and provide them in a PEM format, but if you want to encrypt the communication that's between Layout Developer that's running and the browser, then you can do that using these two keywords. So moving on then to the next section of updates provided in Layout Developer 12.1, and that are changes that we made to the Pseudo-font feature. For those of you who don't know what pseudo-fonts are inside Layout Developer, they're a way of creating a virtual font within your template which combines a number of different system fonts to cover different character groups within the Unicode spec. So you might have a font which looks good for Latin characters and a separate system font which looks good for Chinese characters or Hebrew or Arabic characters, and you want to combine those into a single font so you're not constantly switching fonts based on the language code of the XML, for example. So things that we've added to this feature for this release. First one is allowing you to scale the subfonts. So the subfonts are the individual system fonts which are combined together to create a pseudo font. What we've found with this one is that you can often get fonts which are at the same size, but they look like they're a different size depending on the character set which they're being output. So what subfont scaling allows you to do is change up the subfont slightly so it more closely matches the visual size of the other subfonts within the pseudo fonts, and that gives a more consistent and coherent look and feel to your pseudo font. This was suggested by a user on the communities page, on the ideas page in the community, and so this hopefully will show you that we do actually listen to you and want to provide features that you're asking for. We've also allowed you to specify how pseudo bold and italic gets applied if you haven't got a variation of those things within your pseudo font. I'll talk about that again in a sec. And we've also allowed you to select a glyph within a font to replace a character rather than just doing individual character mapping. And again, the select glyph feature was suggested as part of the ideas page on the community site. So let's look at subfont scaling then. So when you create your subfont, when you're defining your pseudo font, you can specify a height and width scale as part of that subfont setup. So you can either specify it through the subfont dialog box, as you can see it's down there at the bottom, or you can specify it as part of the keywords in the control stream. And as you can see there, it's preceded by the % symbol to allow you to scale the subfont. This is a percentage value. Okay, so 100% is the same text height, but you can go up and down, scale the subfont so it looks either bigger or smaller. You've been able to use pseudo-fonts as part of font families for quite a while now, and you can specify the variation of the pseudo-font within the font family as part of the keywords when you're setting up your pseudo-font. However, if you don't have a bold or an italic variant, you can tell the pseudo-font how to apply pseudo bold or pseudo italic. So there's a fake italic keyword to apply the equivalent of the TS, the text shear processing instruction, and there's two versions of fake bold. So the first one is the overprint version, so you can output two versions of the character, one offset from the other, and the TWT processing instruction tells layout developer how much the offset is going to be. But the other mode that we've provided in this release is mode 2, and that puts a little outline, text outline around the characters. So you can specify how thick that outline is going to be as part of fake bold mode 2. When we introduced OpenType font support in 12.0, we allowed access to specific glyphs within the font. As long as you know the glyph position number, you can output that glyph. In pseudo-fonts now, you can map characters to a specific glyph in your OpenType font if you want to. So there's a new keyword, map glyph, and that allows you to map the character, in this case character 65, to a specific glyph within a specific font. So if you want to replace an R, capital R, for one with a big swash underneath it, and you happen to know the glyph position within your font, then you can call that specifically inside your pseudo font. The final section in this presentation is to talk about the changes we made to our support for the MathJax library. So we were really happy in 12.0 to provide support for the MathJax library. MathJax allows you to create graphical representations of MathML and Tech inside Layout Developer and put those onto a page. So we've updated the library to 2.7.9. This was the latest stable release that was available for download when we built this version of Layout Developer. We've made some fixes in the code to support attribute values, which for some reason were overlooked before, and we've added some features to allow character scaling. We've added some output option support as well. So these things are available in the MathJax library, and we can now make them available to our users, and I'll show you how to do that in a sec. So first one is you can scale the generated graphic. So by default it would be a certain size, but you can make it bigger or smaller if you want to now. You can specify the stroke width and color and the fill of the characters which have been output in the graphic. You can also now, and this is quite a big one, popular one I think, specify the MathJax font to use for outputting the characters. So some of the fonts which are supported by MathJax don't have support for certain characters, some do. So you can now specify the MathJax font from one of the list of available MathJax fonts. If the characters aren't in the MathJax font, then you can now specify the font family and the font size to use for those non-supported characters. So before they were coming out and they looked a little bit different in size and shape to the characters which are being output from the supported fonts. Now you can specify the size of that and which font family to use. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to support line breaking in this release. We're hoping that version 3 will have line breaking support implemented, which we'll be able to expose in a later release. So as before, when you're creating a graphic from using the MathJax library, you'll create an object. So beforehand you would specify what the content was, what the output graphic name was going to be, and the type of input. Now you can specify the options using different properties on that object that you create and pass to the create graphic method. So the options are listed in the documentation, but you can now specify those, and the graphic which gets returned from the create graphic method will follow those options that you've set. So that wraps up this video, introducing you to the features which are provided in Layout Developer 12.1. Hope you found it interesting. Keep your eyes peeled for more presentations on our YouTube site. If you have any questions about any of it, feel free to drop me a line. Thanks and goodbye.